It's something which people generally won't need to use, but if you do, you can get to absolutely anything. So for example, here we can see information that's stored by Microsoft Exchange. Any other software that you have installed into Active Directory, those fields will appear. RDMC doesn't need to know specifically about the applications. Anything that is extended Active Directory will appear in this list. Okay, we'll now go down and take a look at security group reports. We'll bypass the basic, we'll go straight to the advanced. You'll note here we've also got the ability to enhance the report by either counting the total number of members in each security group or the most granular report where we show each group with the members of that group as well. So that will give you a complete rundown on everybody's security level within Active Directory. So again, we'll do a quick report, we'll run it across the whole domain. Now this time we won't see the information coming up until the entire report is completed because we've asked for counts of the number of members. Okay, so again these are all of our security groups within Active Directory. The type, is it a global group, a universal group, etc. As we scroll across, you'll see description fields, the GUID, which is a unique identifier for that group. Parent is where in Active Directory it sits, in other words, what group is it stored under, where does it exist within the schema, and again the membership count. So we can see from here how many people are members of each group and the last time that the security settings on that group were changed. Now if we go down and also specify display group members, this again will take a little bit longer, but this will give us the most comprehensive breakdown that we can get. So you'll see in this case now that there's a fair bit of spacing in between each one. We'll wait for it to finish before scrolling across, but the reason this is showing us this is because at the top we have the group and the group details. When we scroll across, we will then also have the users who are members of those groups, and again specific account information such as first and last name, including the full name, logon details, and where that user exists within Active Directory as well. This is useful for a number of reasons. Particularly it's also useful to be able to back up this information apart from reporting on it. If you want to keep effectively an offline copy of what all of the permissions on your domain are, simply export this information to a file and hold on to it. In the case that you have an absolutely catastrophic disaster and lose your Active Directory, you can effectively rebuild it using the information that you can extract from these reports.
So is that something you'd recommend, Jeff, as just good IT management?
It definitely doesn't hurt. It's the sort of thing where realistically if you have a disaster that completely destroys Active Directory, you're going to have an awful number of things to worry about. And so having these backups will certainly help, although it's admittedly probably will be the least of your problems at the time. There are a number of functions within RDMC in addition to the Active Directory reporting that you can use to do this, such as the security manager that allows you to store file permissions and things like that as well. Within the schools, it's also important to note that because of the way CEO have set things up, most of you have a backup domain controller on a virtual machine at the data center. This is a very, very useful thing because it means that there is a synchronized copy of all of this information stored centrally. Even if your on-site domain controller goes up in flames, that information will be safely stored at the data center, which is good to know. Okay, we'll move down now to what is possibly the most useful function in Active Directory management. This is something which we used to get questions about constantly because there were absolutely no tools on the market with the ability to do this. For people who spend a fair bit of time working with Active Directory and particularly browsing through their own domain, you'll be quite aware of the number of dead or unused computer accounts which end up adding up in Active Directory. Each time you build a machine using RIS, each time you join a machine to the domain, it creates an account for that machine. However, those accounts are never deleted unless you specifically go into Active Directory to do it. This can be even more problematic because even if you do go into Active Directory to do a cleanup, you've got no easy way of telling which accounts you can get rid of and which ones you can't. You're forced to go by PC name or something similar to that, looking for machines that you don't recognize in order to delete them. The end result is that almost every organization that we have gone into has a substantial number of accounts within Active Directory that simply don't need to be there anymore. In fact, most commonly, they'll actually have more unused computer accounts in Active Directory than live ones. They literally can tally up into the thousands, and this happens very easily. Within RDMC, we've provided a way to actually report not only on which accounts exist, but we've also pulled out information including when they were last used. So for this one, we'll go down to the last logon date and time report. This is the one that you would normally use to perform that.
So can this help with a lot of software compliance questions at organisations?
This is not quite so much software compliance. It would affect software compliance if you had Windows Server and were working on per seat licensing and needed to actually determine how many machines you had connecting to Active Directory. Although regular software compliance is performed primarily through the software register within RDMC.
Right.
So in this case, again, we'll run the report, pull the information out. Now, what it's doing at the moment is going through and querying each domain controller. There is a checkbox there which allows you to prevent it from doing that, because it will obviously be quicker if you only query one. The reason that we do this is to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information. Each of the domain controllers should be synchronizing with each other regularly, but when you perform a report like this, the information can be at least 15 minutes out quite easily. So by doing this, we simply make sure that we've got a list of every account that's listed on every domain controller. So we'll just wait for it to finish searching the remaining domain controllers. Okay, now we're done. Now this is these two are the fields which are of particular interest here, account created and last logon. If we sort this list by last logon, this will now show us the items at the top are machines which have not been logged into Active Directory for some time. So in this particular case, these machines have not been logged on for very close to a year. That's usually a fairly good indication that that machine is probably no longer in use. So again, by using the functions that we've got, we can simply go through, select the machines which are earlier than a certain date. We can then either move them into a temporary OU so that we can observe them or disable them, or we can simply delete them outright. Now, a few things here though that we should look at. As it's a very good idea to run this report on a regular basis to perform a clean out. At the same time, you want to be very careful about not removing any accounts that are potentially in use. If you do, you'll need to go back to the computer that you've removed and join it back into Active Directory. It's not catastrophic, but nonetheless it's a pain. So a few things to look at here. First off, the last logon date. If you see this on an account 10111601, this is similar to the 1970 date that we saw earlier. It's actually the earliest date that Active Directory is able to store in this field. This will indicate one of two things. It means either the account has not been used since your Active Directory was upgraded from an NT4 domain, or that the machine has actually never logged on to the domain. This only happens in a couple of ways. It's usually caused when you're performing a Microsoft RIS or an SOE framework build. At the first stage of the build, when you enter the PC details, a computer account is created immediately. However, if that machine was never fully built, it never actually got to the stage where Windows started up and it logged onto the domain. If that's the case, you will see that last logon date there. Usually those machines can be deleted outright because obviously they've never connected the domain before. Chances are they're not going to. Secondly, when you look at this last logon date, there is one circumstance in which it can be deceptive, and this is where you have to be very, very careful. Normally what we do is we'll pick something and say, for example, any machine that hasn't connected to Active Directory or hasn't logged into Active Directory within, say, 3 months can safely be removed, because generally anybody who's been on leave should have been back by then. If they were going to use their machine, they would have. However, if you've got a circumstance where either you've got a user who spends a lot of time working off-site and only comes in and connects their machine to the network occasionally, or if you've got machines which are in use but remain running at all times, these will show you results which would appear to be inactive. So for example, in a number of organisations, they've got machines performing things like building management or monitoring functions, that kind of thing, which are simply left running 24/7. They're never actually rebooted. As a result, the machine may have been running since, for instance, the 1st of January. It will show a log-on time that's now several months old, but in fact the machine is still logged on currently. If you're not sure about that, the best thing to do is to actually produce your list, go in, use the standard tools within RDMC to perform a ping test and actually find out if these machines are live. Obviously anything that's currently responding to pings is something which is in use and therefore shouldn't be removed from Active Directory. However, anything else, if it's not responding to pings and it hasn't appeared on the network within a reasonable period of time, then you can be pretty safe in disabling or deleting that. This really can make life an awful lot easier when you're managing Active Directory, because getting rid of all of those unused computer accounts makes things much, much simpler. Again, with this, we can also go export this report information to Excel. This is something that a lot of organisations do now regularly. It effectively allows them to track the movements of machines within the network. It allows them to see how many new machines have been added in based on the account creation date.